G'day guys, just following on from last week's video, I wanted to do another one around the history of Kokuteeru, both in terms of the lead up and the events surrounding the book itself. I want to do this for two reasons. One, because it's fascinating, and two, because it gives a really interesting insight into what was happening around this book when it was published, and Yonekichi made his drive to do so. So to discuss Kokuteeru properly, first we have to go back to the Sengoku Jidai. So this is a period also known as the period of warring states, where Japan was fractured into small feudal kingdoms that were constantly at war for a near 200-year period. So what's most important about the Sengoku Jidai is how it ended. It ended with the establishment of the Tokugawa shogunate, which led to the Edo period, which was a period of relative peace for nearly 250 years. This is a time period characterized by many different factors, but the most notable one being during the Edo period, Japan cut off any foreign trade whatsoever. There was very small amounts in the bottom islands from Portuguese and Dutch, but generally speaking, any kind of trader that would come towards Japan would be told to leave. The reasons for this kind of vary, but largely it's because Western powers were largely a very destabilizing force, as we saw in Korea, Thailand, and China in these centuries. It wasn't until 1853 that Japan was forced to open its borders. Whilst this period during the Edo period was very stable, it wasn't hugely innovative, and the West kicked into the Industrial Revolution, so the technological differences between these nations became very stark. And Japan realized this when, in 1853, American battleships that were steel-clad and steam-powered rolled into Kagoshima Bay. A man by the name of Admiral Perry forced the shogun to open his borders and sign some terrible trade treaties. Now this then led to political fracturing within Japan, that then led to the civil war known as the Boshin War. By the end of this, the shogun was gone, and the emperor had established himself as a ruler with numerous political factions. After this, we move into the Meiji period, and this is when Japan kicked into modernizing their country. They had their own little mini industrial revolution that moved very quickly as they modernized their army, their navy, their factories, their economy, their systems of government. And by 1905, they beat the Russians in naval warfare, which was earth-shattering. But also during this time period is when Japan got access to all the art in the other parts of the world, and the rest of the world got access to Japan's art as well. So there was a great cultural exchange. Van Gogh is noted for bringing up the woodblocks that were coming out of Japan, as considering them like incredible art. And also the Japanese people suddenly had access to all of these different art forms from the Western world, from fashion to music to theatre, and also bartending and fine dining. And this was when we started to see bartending make its way into Japan. It started off in trade embassies in Yokohama, the Yokohama Hotel being the first cocktail bar to be opened in Japan, and then continued forward from there as various embassies from different parts of the world would sail in bartenders to make their styles of drinks. And this led to a very interesting melting pot for the bartending scene in Japan, because they didn't just have a singular influence. They had embassies from a lot of Western countries, and thus a lot of Western bartenders. So they had bartenders from America and England and Germany and France, all working within Japan and teaching all the local people like their various styles of bartending. Fast forward, and after a while the Japanese people figured out their own way of doing things, taking the best of everything that they enjoy. This is also a time period where we started to see figures like Louis Eppinger create drinks like the Bamboo, and Japan became well known for having its own little cocktail scene in Ginza. However, when we get to Kokuteeru in 1924, this was a very different time. There was numerous disasters that would happen and the rise of militarism within Japanese society. In 1918, there was rice riots due to inflation outpricing basic foodstuffs. In 1921, the Prime Minister of Japan was stabbed to death in broad daylight in a train station in Tokyo. The man who did it didn't go to jail because his justification was the Prime Minister was weakening the military and thus he had to be killed. In 1923, there was the Kanto earthquake, which is a 7.8 Richter scale earthquake that killed roughly 140,000 people and destroyed most of Yokohama and the bar scene with it. And at the time period of 1924, when Kokuteeru was being published, was the rise of militarism, as the political factions started to get beaten down by military ideals, and the slogan of luxury is the enemy started to become very commonplace. And so only a few years after Kokuteeru was published, most of the cocktail bars in Japan were gone, or deeply, deeply underground. And I like to kind of bring these factors up just to give you an idea of when this book was published. And I very much like the idea that in amongst all of this pain and suffering and turmoil and fear, that Yonekichi Maeda still decided that he wanted to publish this book and showcase the thing that he loved and that he was the most passionate about. Alright guys, so thank you so much for your time. If you know anyone who you think would be interested in this book or this Kickstarter, please share this video with them.